All right, what's happening, guys? Tomorrow is the 4th of July, and I'm getting all amped up for it. I'm ready. I've been listening to Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA on repeat, so I'm feeling downright patriotic, but I wanted to chat with you guys on a personal level before we jump into some stuff on statistics and what we're doing as a society to help spread the Second Amendment and ensure that we have a future for our kids. Today, I think there's a war being waged on anything that's old, and the spirit of progress. It makes somewhat sense to just cut ties with any weight that may hinder us from leaping forward into the future. And if progress is the name of the game, tradition can be a huge anchor. But in the words of G.K. Chesterton, you shouldn't tear down a fence until you first pause to reflect of why that fence was constructed. The First and Second Amendments are absolutely critical and essential for our future freedom. And so when we talk about First and Second Amendment, we're really not talking as much about preserving our freedom. It's not as much about us. It's more about our grandkids. As whatever we do now, we're not going to necessarily feel such immediate ripple effects, but as it continues to grow and work itself out over time, freedom, which can be just hindered a little bit by some small change right now, could have dramatic effects later. Similarly, like if you were shooting, if you made just a tiny adjustment on your barrel, a few feet out from the barrel, the bullet wouldn't change much. But over the course of hundreds and hundreds of yards, that little distance becomes a huge distance. And so what we do now regarding liberty and freedom may seem like a small change. Now, I'm a student of history. Not many people are. You feel like you are, but not many people actually study history. And I wanted to talk about the First and Second Amendment. The reasons why the First Amendment, which guarantees free speech, and the Second Amendment, which guarantees our right to maintain and keep that free speech through the use of force. That means we can have firearms and whatever technology that allows us to be able to defend ourselves in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our founders astutely realized, looking through all the bloodshed within thousands of years of history, they took that, not like textbook classroom history that we're all allergic to and isn't fun. It's like, oh, memorizing dates. It's no, really and truly, over thousands of years, families are ripped apart, husbands and wives separated as one dies in bloody battle and tyrannical rulers come in and enslave nations. This is real stuff. And so what we've learned over the course of thousands of years is if the individual doesn't have the ability to protect themselves from either be invaders and foreign forces or its own government, you're toast. And it may not come for you and your generation, but it will come for your kids. And if it doesn't come for your kids, make no mistake, your grandkids are going to die at the hands of tyrants. And I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just trying to be a calm thinking student of history as you read the writing on the wall and be like, man, the natural progression of governments is toward tyranny, and that's because the natural inclination of man is toward violence, war, and taking what they would from other people. Now, I don't think that's all men. I think if we had had a vote right now that of like, hey, who's in favor of world peace? I think most of the hands in the world would raise up of like, okay, so we're just going to stop raping, pillaging, plundering, taking stuff that's not yours. And most of the world raises their hand and says, yep, I'm down for that. The problem is there'll always be evil men who twist and recruit others to their own will, solicit armies. So there's always a third Reich that's rising up somewhere in the distance. And given enough time, whether it's Taliban or Al-Qaeda, whatever, given enough time, they amass energy, forces, resources, and then they come after the innocent to take what isn't theirs. And so the problem is if we disarm, we have no hope of being able to withstand those invaders. The fact of the world is, in all of human history, point to a single time, even a year period, where there wasn't wars happening somewhere in the world, and you will be able to come up with zero, zip, nada. There's always going to be wars. Furthermore, because those evil men occupy places in power as well, hey, Governments tend toward corruption, and I don't have to sell any of you on that fact. And as soon as somebody gains government authority and corruption can creep in and become more and more widespread, at some point, that government, which started off as wonderful and good, and we all had it planned out in our socio-political ideas, the political scientists say, hey, not this system, this system. And the problem is less what form of government you choose. The problem is that men are devils. As Thomas Jefferson would point out, if men were angels, there'd be no need of government. We need government to curb the lusts of men. We need laws protecting. But the problem is what happens when the lawmakers themselves become corrupt? Who protects us for them? And the only thing, the absolute only thing that can protect you from your government is the citizens having the ability to protect themselves and to be able to overthrow their own government. And don't rally the war cry. It's not that time. We're not doing that. Love my country, and despite all of her flaws right now, tons of flaws. If you want to throw rocks at the United States and say, hey, what about this and this and this terrible thing? I'd be like, yeah, that's really awful. Hey, the hands of every country around the planet are stained with blood. If you don't believe me, look in a little bit closer. Everyone's guilty. Everyone's become corrupt. No one seeks after righteous gain. And so that's the difficulty. Now, our founders astutely realized that, hey, man, men are devils. People tend toward corruption. We've got this idea for the freest nation ever conceived of by man. We'll give you the right to critique your leaders and authorities, and we'll give you the means to overthrow us if we overstep our bound. No government ever had the audacity to put in the hands of the people the own fail-safe to terminate them as their government. We become, the United States, the freest nation in the history of the world. There was freedom before, but not freedom like we have. Now, in assigning freedom, our founders recognized that all men and women had a right, a natural right. If you have a pulse, you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's not something the government gives. It's saying, hey, if you have a beating heart, you have the right to pursue life, and you have the means to protect it as well. If you have the right to life, then you should have the right to protect that life. Then liberty, the pursuit of happiness. You get those things, and it's our job as a government to help ensure that you keep those, and we promise to not take it away. And here's our promise. Here's our accord with you. We're going to give you a bunch of guns. Whatever or weapons of war that we have, we'll ensure that you are those weapons of war, and you have them. The Second Amendment, it wasn't like, hey, where should we put this right to bear arms? It was the only guarantor that we could actually keep those fundamental and natural rights. That's why it was number 2. We were given the Second Amendment as a guarantor that we could keep our natural born freedoms. The only way we keep the First Amendment is if we have the Second Amendment. And if all of a sudden the Second Amendment was swept away tomorrow, maybe we wouldn't feel those pains, but our kids would. Our grandkids certainly would, as freedom dies a little bit at a time until all of the sudden we join the millions and millions of people through all history. And what we're doing is we've been given this amazing gift in our brilliant Constitution as we just give away our freedom of speech, our First Amendment, and our Second Amendment is under violent assault. Make no mistake, this is end game type stuff. If this passes. Now, the Second Amendment, if you don't know, the Second Amendment goes like this. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What our founders realized, here, look, a well-regulated militia, not a standing army. A militia was actually just you and I. Well-regulated militia meant you, me, your neighbors. Oh yeah, we work jobs, mechanics and YouTubers and whatever our jobs are, we are the militia. That was how armies were thought of in early America, 1776. It was the militia, and we'd say goodbye to our wives and kids, and we'd grab whatever muskets we had or whatever weapons of war, and we would meet up with our local militia and be like, hey, Harry, hey, Sam, what's happening? Business new? Now we got to fight a war now. That's the militia. And what the founders recognized is if you didn't have a well-regulated militia, that's the common man with firearms, there would be no absolute long-term security of a free state. It just doesn't work. It never has. It never will. You have to give the individual the right to protect themselves and keep their rights, because big brother government isn't going to do it. They naturally drift toward tyranny. Now, what I wanted to do in the rest of this video, I'll go ahead and jump in the studio, clean up the look just a little bit for you, but I want to rattle off some statistics to corroborate some of the evidence that I've come about. As some of you guys maybe out there's an anti-gunner, and maybe you had the courage to weigh in and listen to an argument that was on a different side of the aisle. You've been fed a different lineup of statistics, and I don't think you're stupid at all. I think you're coming from a different place, and I applaud you for actually listening to somebody else on the other side of the aisle. I am passionate about the First and Second Amendment. I love my country. I hope that you do as well. I believe that you do. But what I see is founders that worked very, very hard intellectually to lay a framework so that all the past problems with bloodshed and fallen nations wouldn't be repeated in the great experiment called America, the freest nation on earth. And I think we're utterly throwing it away. And what that is we're essentially, if we're just throwing it away, then with it, we throw away the sacrifice of every soldier that died bleeding in a foxhole, begging to see their mother. Every single one of those sacrifices is utterly spent if we take our gift of freedom we were born into and just give it away. The First and the Second Amendment are under assault right now like never before. And it's under the guise of political correct, hate speech, safe spaces. It's a muzzle of political correctness that they would fit upon all conservative opponents so that we can't just say, hey, what about the Constitution? And they're like, oh, that old document? We're more progressive. And I'm like, what you're doing is sealing the fate of our grandkids. I'm not being dramatic. Literally, they will die a gruesome death because of that. And you're like, how could it come to that? I'm like, because it always has come to that. Look at history. It always has come to that. The 20th century in the civilized world. I mean, you would think in the 20th century, with all the technological advances we've had, all the scientific advances, surely the civilized world is becoming just that, civilized. But the 20th century was the bloodiest century known to man. All right, guys, I realize that was a pretty impassioned rant. I don't speak politically very often, and really I'm not even doing that. I'm thinking more of philosophically, I'm thinking historically, and I'm reading the writing on the wall and saying we are going down a very, very dangerous path. What I want to do is back up some of what I've been saying into the present based on some statistics I got from not some reputable sources, the top reputable sources. I want to review some of that, and then I want to talk about what we as a Warrior Poet Society are doing to support the Second Amendment. All right, folks, riddle me this. When you have two completely antithetical sets of statistics, how do you arbitrate as a layman between the two? One side says, hey, if the more guns, the more innocent people are dying. And the other side says literally the absolute opposite. Hey, the more guns you have in the hands of responsible armed citizens, concealed carriers, the lower the murder rate. And so you have these two completely different warring ideas, and both will bring in their experts, sort their data, and both seems completely obsessed with the idea that they're right. So I think in this, we have to judiciously, instead of having that good old confirmation bias, which means you have what you already believe in, and then you just look for data to support that, it'd be really helpful to really find out who the actual experts are and find out a way to arbitrate between them. There's a professor by the name of John Lott, Dr. John Lott. He literally wrote the book on the war on guns, The War on Guns, so appropriately titled, and he gets into the actual data. So it's not just this blanket report of this type of statistic where it's kind of the left statistics and the right statistics. What he does is he takes all the different peer-reviewed data collections and statistics that rolls out, and he studies them. And so what he's looking at is essentially the top criminologists criminologists and economists from around the country who are compiling all of this data. Now, he has a few different criteria because a lot of folks will put stuff out and you're like, how do you know whether that's good data or bad data collection? How do you know that wasn't manipulated so that somebody could get the results they wanted to? So what Dr. John Lott did is first he went around the country looking at all the criminologists and economists. And what he wanted to do is separate the fact from fiction kind of stuff, the fluff, the anecdotal knowledge. He wanted to be like, all right, who is actually going upon data collection as a statistician and a scientist would, with certain controls and standard deviations and all that stuff, and just let the data speak. One way you can quickly weed this out is check out, okay, a scientist always collects their data, they run their tests, and then they submit how they did their testing, the data, and their ultimate conclusions to peer review. So when you find something without any footnotes, citations, where you can really look at the raw data, and you don't see any peer review, as a scientist, a statistician, a political scientist, or one of these economists or criminologists, you can immediately take that data and you can punt it into oblivion because it's worthless for scientific review. Now, what I want to hit you with is 3 statistics that Dr. Lott found on all these peer-reviewed scientists, criminologists, and economists alike. The first one, 91% of criminologists and economists agree that gun-free zones are more likely to attract criminals than they are to deter them. Gun-free zone signs just do not work. All it's doing is advertising to the bad guy, hey, if you want to come in and take or do violence, there's no one here that's going to stop you. And us, we're like, oh, let's ban gun. Hey, law-breaking people have no problem with you adding on another law that they'll break. Makes no sense, but 91% of criminologists and economists agree this is the actual data. It's not the activism that you see today, as journalists really aren't journalists anymore. This isn't everyone, but this is a wide sweeping generalization that I think is absolutely fair. Instead, what you find is these folks that stand up and they peddle their own indoctrinized activism. They're not giving you the raw data, so you're not seeing folks on the left be like, you know what? I'm a leftist, but I really saw that the right side, they had this piece right because here's the data. What do you say? No, instead, everyone digs in their heels and say, my party is right completely wholesale and they are completely wrong and they're the devil. I'm like, well, what you can be sure of is the death of journalism has happened as mainstream media has all just become a bunch of puppet activists peddling an indoctrined speech of like, I want actual data and here is one of them. Here's another. This is shocking as well. 81% of criminologists and economists say that permitted concealed handguns lower the murder rate. What that means is when the good guys have guns, bad guys are not bringing out guns to kill as many people. If you would like to keep the population safe, then give innocent, law-abiding citizens the means to protect themselves. If you end up just taking away the guns from the good guy, the bad guys, it's shooting fish in a barrel. When you make laws or you ban guns or confiscate guns or do anything like that, there's already probably more guns in the United States than there are people. So making a policy, now where we're at, in other countries it's not that way, but in the United States, whether you like it or not, that is a fact where we have more guns per capita than any other nation by a massive margin. What that means is the idyllic, let's just get rid of guns, is really just fanciful thinking. Bad guys are not giving up their guns if you tell them to. You make a law, hey, turn in your guns or else. And the bad guys are like, hey, I'm already breaking laws. How about no? But the good guys are like, better follow the law. So really what you're seeing is, hey, if you ban guns or take them away from people or make them harder for good guys to get, bad guys have free reign to commit murderous acts. When good guys have guns, then everything becomes better. This is why law enforcement is one of the biggest groups in the United States that's pro-gun. I think it was the Police One did a survey, and I think 91% of cops sounded off, maybe it was 93%, that they wanted more concealed carriers with guns. So pretty shocking there as well. The third one, 88% of criminologists and economists say guns are more frequently used in self-defense than they are in the commission of crime. 88% of criminologists. Guns are more frequently used in self-defense than they are used in commission of crime. Meaning, hey, if you give people guns, law-abiding citizens aren't going out and just shooting people up, and that's most of the world. That's most of the United States. It's a few apples ruining the bunch. Now, a lot of these statistics get conflated and get really difficult when the leftists who are trying to manipulate data do purposely disingenuous things, such as they say, hey, the suicides that are happening via gun is actually just gun violence, and so they throw that in the pot. And then all this gang violence, and that gets thrown in the pot. And so what you have is like, whoa, this many gun deaths, when really it was just suicide. And if they didn't have guns, guess what? They would have been using carbon monoxide or poison or 100 other wiles. And so you have a false misrepresentation of the data, and it's just lying. So now what remains is to talk about what we as a society are doing to fight for the Second Amendment. Guys, as I said earlier in this video, the repercussions of losing our Second Amendment is the guaranteed loss of the First Amendment, and then a government that we cannot ever keep in check, and our grandkids are the ones that are ultimately going to pay the ultimate price for it. That's one piece of it. A second thing is people are going to die if you take away guns. That's what the data leads to, is if you have concealed carriers, less people are getting shot up. When you have some wacko sicko who wants to go shoot up a school, but you've got armed people on the scene, they can end that really, really quickly. Like I just pointed out in a recent video on active killers, where this dude who tried to shoot up a courthouse in Dallas got dirt napped by some federal agent before he was able to kill anyone. It was a good guy with a gun that stopped the bad guy with a gun, and there was no collateral damage because of it. Good win. That's wonderful. So what are we doing as a society? One is we are life members of multiple gun organizations that are in politics, that are lobbying, and that are doing all kinds of stuff in the courts to ensure the Second Amendment is preserved. Those include the Second Amendment Foundation, which we're life members and monthly contributors to. So when you guys buy merch, like here's our Second Amendment shirt and all this just different apparel and all the stuff from targets and knives and bags, all the stuff on the Warrior Poet Supply Co. site, when you shop that, portions of the proceeds go to help Second Amendment stuff. So that's really helpful. But the Second Amendment Foundation, also the GOA, that's the Gun Owners of America. Again, life members and monthly contributors. We're not just one-time mix over there. We're invested in this. Also, the NRA, that's something I'm doing personally and not with company dollars. In case you really hate NRA, I'm like, I'm not doing that, because they do need to clean up some act and they need to tighten that up. But I personally am an NRA instructor, and I carry that. So another thing is the USCCA. There's things that our dollars are definitely going to, as well as the USCCA is not doing as much in the political spheres as, say, the GOA or Second Amendment Foundation or in NRA, but they're doing a lot in the courts to make sure court cases are won so that rights are upheld within the judicial branch of government. I'd also like to say, in addition to those 4 different gun organizations that we are either personally or as a company supporting to ensure the Second Amendment lives on, we're also giving to a whole bunch of other stuff. We want to be a generous society being forces for good, so we've already adopted kids from all over, 3 different continents, all over the world through Compassion International. We're doing stuff through Patch Our Planet, which is helping orphanages and kids overseas as well. We love kids. Another thing we're also doing is helping with service members who have post-traumatic stress and things like traumatic brain injury through Warriors Heart Foundation. So again, these are stuff we've given to hurricane kind of relief stuff, natural disaster stuff in the past. And aside from that, we're also through our own individual salaries giving toward things like foreign missions and local churches. We are trying more and more to be a generous society and a force for good out there. So those are some things that we're doing. So some of you right now are thinking, how can you support us? And I thank you for that. That's super cool of you. If you check below in the description, you'll see how you can get involved and help us as a society, whether that's through direct support or it's through just shopping our website and getting stuff like that. All of that helps. Train hard, train smart, and God bless America. See you guys.